Bachelor update. Alright, guys. So this was the final week of The Bachelor, and our journey has come to an end. Matt's journey has come to an end, but we were able to get the we were able on Monday to get the finale, and we were able to get the after the final rose. Now, first of all, I'm gonna just preface this and say the finale wasn't overly eventful, so I'm kind of like breeze through the thing and give my thoughts on that, and then a lot more of the segment is gonna be dedicated to the after the final rose because I got a ton of thoughts on it. So we start off the finale. Michelle met Matt's mom and his brother John, and John was asking like really like tough questions to the girls. He asked like what they saw in Matt, what they see, what was the future they see with his brother. They asked about past relationships, stuff like that. John also said that this whole situation or this whole process is something he's never seen, a light he's never seen his brother in, because his brother's never really had any like long-term relationships or long committed relationships. So to see him like doting over these women was something fresh and new for him. And John was just reading her body language a little bit and felt as if, he genuinely felt like, Matt had made the right decision in picking her to be one of the finalists. But at the same time, he felt like he would have to defer the final decision to his mom, him and Matt's mom, because she would have the final say on whether or not these are the right women for their son and for her son and his brother. His mom like choked up when Michelle talked about her family because Michelle. I said I thought personally in the hometown episode I thought like Michelle had like the best um family. It was definitely like the family. I was talking to it with somebody on Twitter. I was saying like that's the type of family I would love to have married into. So, she talked about Michelle, she talked to his mom, Patty, about her family and how close they are and stuff like that. And her mom and his mom was actually kind of choked up because she felt guilty that she wasn't able to provide that same type of environment for Matt. And she acknowledged that Matt overcame a lot, and she was really like proud of the man he became and the type of things he accomplished in his life. And then next up was of course Rachel. And before I felt kind of I was like, if you look at like John, he had the braids, he had like the fronts, the gold fronts on. I was like, yo, and how like he was really like me, it felt like he was kind of like staring into like Michelle's soul when they met. I was like, yo, like I feel like John would probably like sniff out the racism, but that was just a quick aside. That was just my idea. So he chatted with her a little bit, asked her kind of like the same questions, and they kind of gave like the same answers. Like I said, it wasn't too much this episode. Something in the first episode, which was one of the very few indicators that like Matt was like interested in Rachel, was like I guess both of them are very big into like into faith and like Christianity, so they kind of bonded off of that, and that was like in like either the first or the second episode. This was before everything with Rachel came out. She said that she became like interested in him after like he kind of like prayed over the first like rose ceremony or the first cocktail party or whatever that they had in the first episode, and she said it was that moment that she was like really really attracted to him. And Matt raised his concerns with his family, and he just said like he really viewed both of these women as his possible wife. And his mom kind of hit him with like the reality, hit him with like a reality check. His mom said that people fall in and out of love, so it's not really like the be all end all. And basically, that love on its own won't carry them through an engagement and through marriage. Different things could happen. Boy, did she know. And it kind of felt like he walked into meeting with his mom and his brother feeling like he would get some kind of like assurance as to which way to go, and that he was making the right choices. But he actually, that assurance was actually replaced with doubt because of what his mom said. And I don't think it was like anything like malicious. I think they were just like being honest because that's your family. They're always gonna have your best interests at heart. So I felt like they were just being honest with him. Matt and Chris discussed their uncertainties. It was our, this episode was actually the last appearance you'll see of Chris Harrison for a while. But they discussed their uncertainties. He discusses uncertainties with Chris, and Chris kind of like talked them off the ledge a little bit. And him and Michelle, like as part of their date, like they rappelled down the side of the resort that they were staying in out there in Pennsylvania, which is like entirely scary. And Matt almost like busts his ass trying to help. And then they finally had their date, and Michelle gave him these matching like basketball jerseys. His said Mr. James, hers said Mrs. James, and she said their team name would be the World Changing Warriors. And then Matt started to express his doubts. But a quick side note, like, he's tall as hell, like she's tall as hell. She's a former basketball player. I believe he played basketball too. And I was like, wow, like yo, they would have some tall ass babies if he'd have chose her. Eventually he did send Michelle home. He I was like confused as hell over the whole conversation because I was kind of like back and forth, like not really paying attention. Because to be honest with you, like you kind of already knew like he was leaning towards Rachel. All indications were, so I wasn't really like paying that no mind. I was really like interested in the after the final rose. But yeah, I was kind of confused because I was like, did he just say that like he didn't know yet or whatever, whatever? And then I just saw her crying. Then the next day, Matt and Rachel's date was canceled because Matt was still kind of emotional over breaking things off with Michelle. Out of the side note, I was like, while I watching this, I'm like, this is just boring. It was just like an entire like 2 hours of this, and I just was like kind of checking out. And it's just something like a point I've been bringing up over like the past couple weeks. I still don't understand how or why he came down to Rachel. Like, the only explanation is like a whole bunch of sappy like jibber jabber. Like, so it's definitely got to be something that only like those two could explain. Maybe it's something that wasn't like translated to that audience, or he had way deeper and way meaningful conversations with Bree, who was the third place finisher, and also Michelle. I thought he had way deeper conversations with a lot of the girls in the house. Matter of fact, like the only deep ass conversation I think they had was like that first episode where they discussed their faith. He gave Rachel the final rose, but he chose not to propose to her based off of what was discussed with his mom. It left a lot of doubt. He just wanted to be certain that um him and her were gonna spend the rest of their life together before he proposed to her. He chose a ring and everything, but he just felt that it wasn't the right time. But he stated that he didn't want her out of his life. Out of all these women, and there were though this was my final thought on the finale. I was like, out of all of these women, and I'm thinking back to all 32 of them, there were some great and there were some great and very interesting women, and like he still chose her. Like I was still confused as to how he came to that conclusion, which is important for the next part when we discuss after the final rose. So immediately after the finale, They aired after the final rose. As we said before, Chris Harrison, due to his comments defending Rachel, defending her for her racist, defending her for her racially insensitive, would not be a part of this, and they chose the author of Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, Emmanuel Acho, who's a former NFL player and is now has a YouTube series called Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, where they discuss different type of topics pertaining to race and society and stuff like that. So the first person brought out was Michelle, and Michelle discussed that she felt he was the one after meeting her family. As a viewer, I could totally understand why she felt so. And she was totally like blindsided by him not choosing her. And she didn't think she got the closure from Matt at that moment. She said that she didn't really get to say her piece, and Matt refused to give her 2 minutes. And she said that she didn't intend on like changing his mind. She just wanted to she just wanted more understanding and kind of like tell him where she was coming from, and they would leave with some kind of understanding. Much in the same way, like when Bree left, she didn't want to leave mad at him. She didn't want to leave upset. She was just sad that things didn't end with them together. And I think that's kind of what Michelle was hoping would happen. And I guess like he refused to talk to her. He refused to talk to her like immediately the after telling her like he wasn't gonna choose her. And then she was asked about the controversy with Rachel, and she said she felt hurt by the controversy. She felt hurt by the controversy, and it came from a place of not knowing history and not knowing that people will be hurt by her behavior. And she said that Rachel had a good heart, but it required learning, and it felt that it kind of came off as inconsiderate. And then she talked about Chris Harrison, felt he added weight to an already difficult situation, and that covers everything from first Black Bachelor, girls racially insensitive past, catching up to her, talking down to Black woman and Rachel Lindsay on Extra, all of these things. So it felt like it added to the whole situation. And she just said she felt exhausted by it. And another side note, Michelle, in my opinion, shouldn't even feel bad. Matt embarrassed himself by picking a racist white woman over her. And the consensus from everyone that I've seen is that she was obviously like the better choice, myself included. And again, she said in explaining what she would have said in those 2 minutes, she said she was like, really like down bad about the whole thing. Like she was crying, she was bawling, she was sitting on the floor crying. Producers saw her crying. It was just like a odd scene. I said, she wasn't really trying to change his mind. She was trying to get some closure. So then Matt came out, and then Matt, of course, apologized. He told her that he admired her strength in dealing with all of this. And Michelle said she still cared for him, and her thoughts about how he should deal with everything going forward. And of course, she made a joke that hopefully in the future he'd get rid of the open-eyed kissing. Another side note, I feel like it would be easier to be sympathetic to Matt if I understood why he chose Rachel over all these other women. If it was another, white contestant or non-black contestant that came out with this racist stuff, anti-black or racially insensitive stuff, it was a lot more interesting women, a lot more attractive women, a lot more women that were easier to like relate to. But like with Rachel, it was like I was, you kind of like she's just her. So it's like you didn't really have like an opinion on her. Like I personally didn't really have an opinion on her. So when this stuff came out, I was just like, oh, all right, well, I don't like her now. Whereas before I wasn't really like leaning any way. But if it was somebody like Katie, who, anybody who's been watching the series knows I'm like infatuated with. If it was her, like I would have been down bad because I would have been like, man, she's like cool. I can't believe she did this. Blah 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 blah. But I didn't know shit about Rachel, so it really came out of left field, and it kind of like made up my mind on her. And another like thing I kind of noticed on a quick side note, Emmanuel actually kept on having to say that he was filling in for Chris Harrison. I don't know if it was just to be like polite to say like, "Oh, I'm not taking over for him," blah blah blah. Blah. Just you know, this particular special, I'm going to be filling his role, or it was being stressed that Harrison isn't gone temporarily, which is important because a lot of the people have said on this special and had said, contestants, past bachelors, past bachelorettes that have said like, it's far too soon. Like you can't, like somebody really couldn't have turned over a leaf this amount of time. Like it's gonna take time, and if it's gonna be a genuine reconciliation, he's gonna have to take the time and put in the work and come out of this whole thing a far different person. So I just thought it was interesting, and it's important because just the other day we found out that Chris Harrison actually hired like some kind of like power media attorney. So it could be a situation where if he's forced to leave the Bachelor franchise, like he's gonna make sure like he cleans up monetarily. So it'll be interesting. We'll be monitoring that and discussing that in future episodes as it comes up. All right, and Matt and Emmanuel talked to each other, black man to black man, and the discussion was about the pressures Matt felt about being the first black bachelor. And Matt said like he felt the weight of society and he felt the weight of the franchise being the first anything. It's a true thing. And one of the things that was like discussed was just when you're a black man and you're in this like white dominated society, it's like you try to be on like your best behavior and try to be the black be you try to be like the best black man that or the best representation of black men as you can be. Talked about making people comfortable with your blackness. I have to mention like Patrice O'Neill. That was one of the stories that I had. We talked about Patrice O'Neill on the show a couple weeks ago, where one of the bits of Patrice O'Neill did was where he talked about like he, he's like this big black guy, and he'd be walking and walk past like a little white lady, and the little white lady would like clutch her purse, because she's inherently afraid of like this big black guy. But at the same time, like Patrice O'Neill is sitting there, he's walking by and he's in his head terrified of this little white lady because he's like, oh my God, I hope nothing happens to this white lady. Like, I hope she won't get killed. I hope she won't get raped. I hope nothing bad happens to this lady. God, please let this white woman get home safely because, in his head, he's like, wow, I'll be like, if something happens to this woman, I'll be like the main suspect. And it's serious. And I've talked about it a lot on the show where as a black man, like I really, sometimes I'll walk on the street and I'll be kind of like afraid, you're kind of afraid, that's the worry that the world already like sees you as a threat or menacing or you're up to no good and stuff like that. And then you kind of you're between like a rock and a hard place by just people already fear you for being you, people don't understand you for being you, and there's already always like the stereotype and like this prejudice against us that we have to um you know keep defending ourselves against. So it was a conversation obviously that's never taken place on one of these after the final rose until today or until this episode. And again, like he was asked by Emmanuel, what attracted to him to Rachel. I was still like that sappy, like, hallmark jibber jabber. And when asked about, what happened, what was it like when the stuff first came out? because obviously he was still with Rachel. And he dismissed it as rumors at first because, he was like, all right, maybe people are just, making this stuff up to get to her, and you don't want to be like reactionary if you still have feelings for this person. And he said he hoped that it weren't, he hoped that the rumors weren't true. And now that it was like, those are pictures distinctly of her in a Southern Belle dress and a antebellum plantation party. It made him question everything because it made him question the person he fell in love with. And he felt as a Southerner because, of course, I believe he grew up in North or South Carolina, that it brought him back to events, people, and places where he didn't belong or he wasn't allowed, and stuff like he didn't want to think about. I talk about that all the time here in New York, where it's probably just as racist as these places, or people are just as racist as these places, but kept under wraps a lot better than those places. Whereas there's certain places in the South, if you grew up, you just know, like, all right, that town, I know it's like 90% white and they don't like people of my kind, so I know I don't have to go there. So I totally understood where he was coming from, especially when you're talking about plantations and Southern pride, and like, she liked a picture with the Confederate flag in it. And that was one of the symbols. That's one of the symbols anywhere, because I've talked about, like, in driving in Pennsylvania, I'd see Confederate flags, and I just know, or also in upstate New York, I was seeing Confederate flags, and I just know, like, okay, especially here in the North, those are places I probably shouldn't, you know, as a black man, be, I probably won't be safe in. And it was then he kind of realized that Rachel couldn't understand what it meant to be a black man in America. And that was one of my first thoughts when this stuff came out. Because I'm like, you go on the show, you're trying to find your wife, you're trying to find somebody you're going to spend the rest of your life with. And you're talking about somebody that you're going to have children with. And I've seen, and a lot of women who've had children with people of a different race. Well, especially in this segment, white and black, where it's a white woman that she had a child with a black man. I've seen a lot of people take pride in that, and raise their kids just as much. Raise their kids with the understanding and appreciation of being black in America. But at the same time, I'm seeing a lot of white women who have black kids that you know they're upset because their children's hair isn't like straight, or if like they left their children with their black fathers, that their kids come back with like black hairstyles. They're upset at that, and it's just like, you had a child with a black man, like they gotta embrace like their African American heritage. So I think that's something that like dawned on Matt. He was just like, if I have kids, like, does she appreciate the society that we live in, where black people in general are, discriminated and go through injustices every day? Like, is she gonna be understanding of that? Because if you took these pictures in 2018, it's kind of bewildering, or it's kind of far fetched that those feelings would just go away by 2020. He admitted that they're no longer together. Him and her separated, broke up, and said that the fact that the stuff wasn't understood by her to be problematic in 28 indicates that she wouldn't fully understand him in 2021. And he was asked by Emmanuel, he was saying, like, people would say, like, are you really holding something from 3 years ago against her? Because some people would say like 3 years ago is a long time ago. And Mac, I thought it was a really, really beautiful and a very, very strong answer when he said, well, you know what? I would say to those people, what else was, what was a long time ago? Plantations and slavery and the Confederacy. So if people can't let that go, why should I let something from 3 years ago go. Matt left, and they brought Rachel out. They showed Rachel the photos. What he asked her what she saw in those pictures, and she said she saw someone who was ignorant because she never asked herself who would offend and what it celebrated. And when he was asked like how did she, what would she blame for her having that ignorance, it was a roundabout. She roundabout suggested that it was because where she grew up, but did insist that it doesn't make it okay. That I had a problem with because, in order to accept Rachel's apology and accept that she's changed, I would have to understand her. And I feel like she didn't really admit to it. Like if you grew up in an area and it was accepted to just be racially biased or racially discriminatory or just plain ignorant to what these things stood for, then obviously there's a lot of children younger than her. There are people older than her that are coming out of our community that have that same style of thinking. So, what are you doing to change that? Like, if I was, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, Rachel, are you going into our community and perhaps your whole life you never interacted with the Black community in your community or closest Black community? Are you reaching out to that community to kind of learn about them and learn about your similarities, the things that make you similar? Because your whole life you were learning ways that you were different. So I didn't get that stuff. And I was like, for us to be understanding that she's a changed person, I'd have to understand how she came to be that person in the first place. I didn't get that after the final rose or from her comments and her apology and her responses in this episode. I thought her reasoning for not getting in front of it, that's something me and Mike talked about, where it was like, why didn't you get it? You knew you did this stuff and you knew you were going to be on The Bachelor and you knew this was obviously the first Black Bachelor. Why don't you try to like get in front of this stuff? And she said she didn't think like the photos would come back on her, and which is another reason. It was just like, I was another indication that like she really didn't change from 2018 to 2020. Because let's be honest, the whole year 2020 was a wash. So basically, all the events from then up until now, because of the pandemic, like basically it's just been 2019 and a half. That's all 2020 and all 2021 so far. So it's basically been a year if these stuff happened in 2018, like a year and a half. It's the stuff happened in 2018. And she didn't think about it. So that shows me like while she was on the show, she was ignorant to it. And I just wasn't buying it. And she did acknowledge that for him to end things, she must have really hurt him by the stuff that happened. Matt was brought back out, and you can see he was visibly hurt. There was a time where he was asked a question, and he took like almost like half a minute to respond. And when asked what hurt him most, he said it was explaining to her why she was wrong because it meant that she didn't understand what it meant to be a Black man in America, which is crucial, which is what I said. Because their kids would be Black as well. And like I said, it's something that was the first when all this controversy came out, and it was, put out there like she was this runner. Like that was one of my first like actions. I was just like, like how do you raise children with a woman with this kind of past as a Black man? And when I asked if like the door was closed on his relationship with Rachel, he said she had to do the work on her own. He didn't really want to embrace, like he was holding her hand and then he let go of it. Part of her past that we brought up on the show, and I thought it would have been brought up in the special, but they didn't never talked about her bullying other girls, other white girls for dating Black guys or being interested in Black guys. Like that part wasn't brought up. And I thought it was an interesting question because like what made you change your mind? Like how do you go from teasing somebody? How do you go from teasing somebody for liking black guys to being on a show where the prize is to become betrothed to a black man? I just very the best analogy I could think of is like you guys, anybody listen to the show, I don't like LeBron James. So it would be as if like all these years I'm, talking shit about LeBron James on social media, and then all of a sudden I'm like on the show or the finalist for biggest LeBron fan ever. You'd be like, what the hell changed? So I thought it was interesting that the fact that she was bullying girls, or at least being critical of other girls who were white or like in black men, how she moved from that. And then Emmanuel Astro said that you're not racist. He didn't think that you are racist because you've done something racially insensitive. I totally disagree with that. I think you are, because you were just as benefit you it's you were benefited with the ignorance, or you were benefited with ignorance because you grew up in a racist community and you chose not to understand people whom you've not met. And that's why I say you're racist. Now, that stuff could be undone if you leave your community, you reach out again, like I say, to whatever African American community is close to where you live. Because, like I said, if y'all both grew up in this area of Georgia, then clearly you guys would have far more similarities than you have differences. So, do I think she's racist? Possibly, because you live in a world where things you do you see no wrong in because you've been conditioned out, and whether it be voluntary or involuntary, but it is up to you to make that change. Like, there's been people who've been former neo Nazis, there's been former Klansmen, been former all kind of racist things that have shed that reputation. And I think the first part is people, a lot of people get more offended by being called a racist than looking back on their actions that made it so that they could be called racist. And I really would have loved, because it was one of the things I was curious in watching um this special, as well as watching the last few weeks, especially when it was kind of like clear, kind of like telegraphed that like he was leaning towards racial. I was really curious to find out, like, hear from the African American or the non-white contestants on the show. And I'll even include, like, the white contestants, because that's the other thing. I was like, damn, bro, like, you could have picked a white girl, but like, why did you have to pick like the racist one? Because not everybody's like a racist. And I would have liked to hear their thoughts. Be like, because for me personally, like, if I was like a contestant on a season of The Bachelorette and The Bachelorette was black, and I've been eliminated, and she eventually chose like a white guy, and he was, it came out like he had a racist past, or like racist social media post, or somebody came out from high school and said like he was bullying them because they were black. I would feel personally insulted, because I'd be like, whoa, like this lady really picked like a racist ass white guy over my black ass. So I'm interested to see if any of the women on the show was like had that same kind of feeling, like this guy really like chose this like racist white girl over me. Um, so that would have been an interesting watch. And the only person I got to speak on it was Michelle. And like one of my criticism about this whole special was I felt like he asked tougher questions to Michelle. I thought like the questions he was asking Rachel, especially in this climate and amidst the controversy surrounding this series, is um I thought it was really I thought it was really weak. I thought they were very like softball or like soft toss questions that she was easy to escape. Like I thought like he could have asked like better follow up questions and really like press her why did you think this was okay? Especially the part when she said like I didn't think like did you he asked her did you go to sleep thinking this will come back on you one day, and she said no, like I really didn't. And it's like he didn't ask why. I would say why. Like I'd say like in 2020, you really think that's something you did 2 years ago? Like you didn't think this would be brought up, especially after stuff that happened in the summer of 2020. So I was very critical of like Emmanuel Asher as the host of this. I was excited to see it. The thing I came away from it thinking, I was like, no wonder he's the host of uncomfortable conversations with a black man, because any conversation dealing with race is going to be uncomfortable. So I don't think I don't think it helps to have like safe Negro during those conversations. Like, no, I'm not saying like Rachel should have been interviewed by Louis Farrakhan, but I think it would have been better to have like a guy that was gonna ask like hard hitting ass questions. I think like on a name out there, like you put like Charlemagne or like perhaps like Nick Cannon or something or somebody like that on our show, like they're gonna like ask her some tough ass questions. But to the future of the Bachelor franchise, we learned that Tasia and I think Caitlyn, both former Bachelorettes, would be hosting the next season of the Bachelorette, and Chris Harrison. And they announced that the who they chose for the next season of Bachelorette came down to Michelle and Katie. And to our surprise, they chose both. And it was a bit confusing because they didn't know if it was going to be a season where they would have two Bachelorettes. But it was announced that it would be Katie as the Bachelorette for season 17, and it would be Michelle for season 18. And I will definitely be watching Michelle's season because I'm really interested, and I thought she was like an awesome girl. So I'd love to see her find her one, because I'm sorry for her. I wasn't not, but she has a beautiful family and she's a beautiful person. So I'm excited to see that. Katie, I'm gonna have to like mentally prepare myself for, because I love me some Katie. I wish I could be on it, but I don't think I could hit the gym and get my sexy on in time. So I'll be watching out from afar. This has been the season of Bachelor, and next week we'll kind of wrap things up and just talk about the whole experience of watching this first season of Bachelor. So for that.